Okay, just imagine this for a second. You're a smart investor. You've crunched the numbers, you've done all your homework, and you've poured money into a company that everyone says is a rocket ship, a tech titan, a national champion. Then one morning, you wake up, you check the news, and $2 billion of that company's cash is just gone. Not lost in some bad bet, not stolen, it's just vanished. Like it was never really there at all.
To be exact, we're talking 1.9 billion euros. Just let that number sink in. It's so huge it's almost funny. But this was supposed to be real cash sitting in real bank accounts, propping up a company worth tens of billions. And this one number? It was about to trigger one of the biggest, most insane financial frauds in modern history.
And look, this wasn't some sketchy startup. This was a blue-chip company, a member of Germany's most exclusive stock index. One day, the money was a fact on their audited books. The next day, their own auditors, the very people paid millions to check this stuff, basically threw up their hands and said, we can't find it. It was gone. This is the story of how that happened.
So, let's get into it. Today, we're unpacking the unbelievable story of Wirecard, a company that promised the world a glimpse of the future, a revolution in how we pay for things. But in reality, it was all a multi-billion-dollar mirage built to fool pretty much the entire financial world. You see, before the collapse, before the headlines and the international manhunt, Wirecard was the pride of Germany. I mean, in a country famous for cars and engineering, Wirecard was supposed to be their answer to Silicon Valley, a fintech hero. To really get how big the fall was, you have to understand just how high they flew.
So what was Wirecard? Well, it started way back in 1999. Under its CEO, Marcus Braun, it got huge by doing the dirty work, processing payments for industries other companies wouldn't touch, like online gambling. And it worked. They grew like crazy. By 2018, they made it to the big leagues, the DAX index, Germany's version of the Dow Jones. At their peak, they were worth a staggering 24 billion euros. That's more than Deutsche Bank.
And the face of this whole thing was CEO Marcus Braun. He had the whole tech guru look down, the black turtleneck. He wasn't just a CEO, he was a visionary, supposedly building the future of money. And boy did people buy it. From Wall Street hedge funds to regular folks, everyone wanted a piece of Germany's tech giant. But here's where it gets interesting. Even while Wirecard was the toast of the town, there were some people who were skeptical. For years, a few journalists and investors looked at the company's picture-perfect growth and thought, this seems a little too perfect. And that kicked off a long, brutal fight.
So you ended up with two completely different stories about the same company. On one side, you had the establishment, Wirecard the innovator, the European PayPal, a celebrated member of the DAX. But on the other side, you had this growing group of critics, led by some really stubborn reporters at the Financial Times, who were saying, hold on, none of this adds up, especially the money they claim to be making in Asia.
So you think the financial cops would jump in and investigate the company, right? Nope. In one of the wildest moves I've ever heard of, Germany's regulator, a group called BaFin, did the exact opposite. They investigated the journalists. They actually went after the people asking the questions, accusing them of trying to wreck the market. It was insane. Germany was basically telling the world, this is our champion, back off.
With that kind of official protection, Wirecard was untouchable for years. So to really understand what was going on, we have to follow the money. Or, in this case, the phantom money. And that means we need to dive into their super complicated and frankly shady business model.
Okay, the key to the whole puzzle is this thing called a third-party acquirer, or TPA. It sounds boring, I know, but stick with me. The idea was simple. In some parts of Asia, Wirecard didn't have a license to operate, so they said they partnered with local companies to process payments for them. The problem? A huge chunk of Wirecard's profits supposedly came from these mystery partners nobody could really check up on.
So here's how it was supposed to work. You buy something online in, say, the Philippines. A local TPA partner handles the payment, collects the cash, and then, this is the magic trick, they put that money into a trustee account for Wirecard. Wirecard then gets to count all that cash as its own revenue back in Germany. See the problem? The actual money was always somewhere else, controlled by someone else. It was the perfect setup. While reporters were chipping away from the outside, the real explosion came from within. This guy is Pav Gill. He was a lawyer for Wirecard in Singapore, and he basically stumbled upon proof of massive fraud. But when he tried to tell his bosses in Germany about it, you know what they did? They didn't investigate the fraud, they went after him. Gill had found the smoking gun.
He had evidence of forged contracts made up just to fake profits. He found these crazy round-tripping schemes, where they'd send money out the back door only to have it come back in the front door disguised as new business. This was it. This was the first real concrete proof that the whispers weren't just whispers, they were true.
With all these leaks coming out, the pressure was just becoming too much. So in a huge gamble to shut everyone up for good, Wirecard hired a top auditing firm, KPMG, to do a special investigation. They promised it would clear their name once and for all. Instead, it was the final nail in the coffin.
And this is it, the cover of that report. In April 2020, when this thing was released, everyone was holding their breath. Most people actually expected it to say Wirecard was clean. But what was inside? Well, it was a ticking time bomb. This was the kill shot. After months of digging, KPMG came back and said, essentially, we can't find the money. They couldn't get the bank statements, they couldn't get confirmations, they simply could not prove that the 1.9 billion euros, the very heart of Wirecard's profits, even existed. The whole thing was a ghost.
Now, the KPMG report didn't scream fraud in capital letters, but it didn't have to. The damage was done. The house of cards started to teeter. But nobody, and I mean nobody, was ready for how fast it would all come crashing down. The final act played out over a single, chaotic week. Just look at this timeline. It's breathtaking. On June 18th, the regular auditor EY finally gives up and says the money's missing. The very next day, the CEO resigns. 3 days later, the company admits the money probably never existed. Brown gets arrested, and by June 25th, just a week later, the entire 24 billion euro company is insolvent. Done. Wiped out.
So what about the guys at the top? While CEO Markus Braun is on trial, but his defense is wild. He says he was a victim too, that he had no idea. But the other guy, the COO, Jan Marsalek, the one everyone thinks was the real puppet master, he disappeared, hopped on a private jet and vanished. Now he's on Interpol's most wanted list with rumored ties to Russian spies. I mean, you can't make this stuff up.
The fall of Wirecard wasn't just about one bad company. It was a massive failure of the entire system. All the checks and balances that are supposed to keep things honest, they all failed at the same time. And what came next was a huge, painful reckoning for Germany and all of Europe.
So, who do you blame? Well, there's plenty of blame to go around. Obviously, you have the crooks running Wirecard, but then you have the auditor, EY, who signed off on their books for a decade without ever actually seeing the cash. And then there's the German regulator, BaFin, who acted more like Wirecard's personal bodyguard than a cop.
The shockwaves were enormous. Regular investors who bought into the hype lost everything. EY is facing an avalanche of lawsuits. The head of BaFin got fired, and the whole agency was overhauled. It was such a national embarrassment that it even led to a full government inquiry that went all the way up to then-Chancellor Angela Merkel.
And that all leads to this final, really troubling question, right? At its core, the Wirecard fraud was simple. It was a lie about cash in a bank. It wasn't some super complex scheme. And if the entire system, the auditors, the regulators, the professional investors, can miss a $2 billion hole sitting right there in plain sight, you have to wonder, what else are they missing?